faith, firearms, freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. Today's episode is brought to you by Kooks Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. KooksHolsters.com. This is episode 7. Thank you for joining me. So how's things going in your world? Mine's been crazy. Huge projects at work kept me really busy all week, working late. My company had one of those team building social outings again this year. Some of you may know what those are like. Last one was my idea. It was a lot of fun. It was a day of shooting at the range. Watching my coworkers get excited about shooting guns for the first time was pretty cool. One of them has since decided he's going to be taking his wife to the range to find one that she likes, and they'll be buying their very first handgun very soon. I thought that was pretty neat. Well, this year's outing was fun, but not quite as fun as last year. It was bowling in a gun-free zone. The first place I've seen with both the 30-06 and 30-07 signs. Yay. I felt pretty naked, as you might expect. But still, it was a good time. Bowled a couple of hundred games, not bad for the first time bowling in 5 years. Also took the IDPA Safety Officer Training class down in Midlothian, Texas. The first half of the day was freezing out in a tent that really didn't do a whole lot of good blocking the wind. It was chilly. The first half of the class is classwork and lecture and question and answers, and then after lunch you get out, and it actually had warmed up. We got out and did some live firework on the range, which was fun. You work through some scenarios, you practice range commands, evaluating stages, setting up stages, working as both the primary SO, that's the guy with the timer, and the scorekeeper SO. Both of those people have important roles to play, and they've got to work together to call the match effectively and fairly. The instructor was Ray Prue, and the safety officer, he's the safety officer instructor for North Texas. It was really, really good. At the end of the day, I passed the class, and I'm now an official IDPA SO. It was also my 23rd wedding anniversary last week. Happy anniversary to the love of my life, Tammy. To give you an idea of what a great wife I've got, I was taking the safety officer class on the day of our anniversary. So I got a good one, no doubt. And as if that wasn't enough, I caught the reloading bug. I got myself a Lee Loadmaster Progressive Press for my birthday last week. I've been tinkering with that in my not so prolific spare time. And hopefully in the near future there'll be some Armed Lutheran ammo coming out. No, not for sale. But hopefully I'll be successfully pressing out some ammo to fire down range. We'll just have to see how that goes. Like I say, been tinkering when I can, trying to get it set up. So I'll keep you posted and let you know how that works out. Anyway, on today's show, we've got listener email from Tim in Germany. I'll be revisiting the $50 get-home bag I wrote about last year. The media's derangement as Hasbro has announced its fully automatic Nerf gun, which sounds like fun, but has them panicked. And Sergeant Bill returns with tips on improving your accuracy. All that and much more straight ahead on Armed Lutheran Radio.
Help support Armed Lutheran Radio. Visit www.patreon.com/armedlutheran and become a sponsor today.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. First off, before I get started here, understand that I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. But I'm even less a fan of Gabby Giffords and her former astronaut husband, Mark Kelly. They're the epitome of arrogant, ignorant hypocrites and frauds. But as you may know, they're my favorite hypocrites and frauds. At some point, I somehow managed to make it onto their mailing list, so I get all their fundraising emails. It's opposition research at this point. Depending on what's going on, those emails run the gamut, and I love to comment on them. I've done it many times. They're gloating over background check bills passing like Washington's Initiative 594. They're panic-stricken when state legislatures pass open carry or constitutional carry or campus carry. They're despondent when anti-gun liberals get shellacked at the ballot box. They're dishonest when, well, pretty much always. Anyway, the latest email from Americans for Irresponsible Solutions, the anti-gun group founded by Gabby and the astronaut, is a study in irony. They're panicked that Donald Trump might use extra-constitutional executive action to overturn President Obama's extra-constitutional executive actions on gun control. Here's what they say. On Saturday night, Donald Trump won the South Carolina Republican primary. He took every delegate, and he also leads in almost every Super Tuesday state. At this point, it's pretty safe to say he is the Republican frontrunner. So it's time to start considering what his victory would mean for our movement. On his first day in office, Donald Trump vowed to overturn President Obama's executive actions, including his recent action to make our communities safer from gun violence. Quote, "The good thing about an executive order, I walk in, sign, I don't have to go through Congress," he said. See, Gabby and Mark are panicked about the idea that Trump might use his phone and his pen to undermine President Obama's phone and his pen, which Gabby and Mark don't seem to have a problem with President Obama using, only when President Trump might use it. Back to the email. He also believes that the answer to gun violence is more guns, an idea that has been thoroughly debunked. Here's the truth. Whoever the nominee is from each party, we need to elect a president who will continue President Obama's leadership on gun violence prevention issues. It's important. This is about saving lives. Well, never mind that nothing that President Obama has done with his phone or his pen has saved a single life. As President Plugs Biden once suggested, hiring more ATF agents to harass gun stores, expanding the definition of what it means to be in the business of selling firearms. None of those proposals will prevent violence. None of them will save a single life. Not even the holy grail of liberal gun control dreams, background checks. Background checks like the one the guy passed who shot Gabby in the face. Like I said, dishonest, as always.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Back in June of 2014, I wrote a piece called The $50 Get Home Bag. I wanted to see if I could put together an effective but inexpensive get-home bag to keep in my car. The idea was prompted by a drive I took through West Texas out near Odessa. And if you've ever been out there, there are long stretches of desolate road where a breakdown would just be a disaster. if you don't have the right supplies. And I actually saw a couple walking on the side of the road in 120-degree heat, and they looked awful. That experience prompted me to think about building a get-home bag. So I decided to see if I could create my own get-home bag with supplies for 4 people, myself, my wife, and 2 kids, for $50 or less. Now, I was able to put together a kit for just $50.50, so I was a little over budget, but not much. For those who are new to the website and never saw the original kit, I'll link to that article in the show notes. But I'll also give you a quick rundown of what made it into the bag. We had a rain ponchos, paracord, multi-tool and a knife, a headlamp, Mylar blankets, emergency food bars, water bottles, toilet paper, a compass, hand warmers, disinfectant wipes, first aid kit, of course, and sunscreen. Now, what I thought I would do is revisit that post today and, based on recent experiences, offer some insight into how effective I think those choices were and how I could improve that kit. As I said in the conclusion of that original post, it doesn't take a lot of money to start doing some simple prepping like this. A get-home bag is simple to put together, and if you already have some of those items, you don't need to buy them. If you've got an extra multi-tool or an extra knife, throw it in the bag. You don't need to go out and buy another one. Already have first aid kits or supplies in your bathroom medicine cabinets, or like I did, have a first aid kit in the car. Scavenge for extras or throw that kit into your get-home bag. If you're already buying bottled water every week, take a couple of bottles from the pantry and put them in the bag. If you've got old book bags or backpacks that your kids don't use anymore, use those rather than buying a new bag. The list was intended to get you started. Use these ideas as a foundation to build on. Don't overdo it, though. Remember, if you put it in the bag, you got to carry it. Well, a year and a half later, what have I learned, and where am I now? Well, since that article was originally posted, my son went through a couple more backpacks for school, and the old ones were worn, but they were still serviceable. So I swapped out the drawstring backpacks that I originally purchased and replaced them with the old backpacks that my son doesn't use anymore. The padded straps I figured would make them a lot easier to carry than the little rope string, and the extra pockets and pouches certainly make it easier to organize all the little things inside instead of just throwing it all into one sack. I did have the occasion to use the bag. In fact, when I flew back to North Carolina for a funeral, I came back to find that my car had a flat tire. And I'd parked in a dimly lit parking garage, and I was there crouched between 2 cars trying to work a jack and remove a tire. And I sure was glad that I decided to go ahead and choose a headlamp instead of a handheld flashlight. It put the light exactly where I needed it. I didn't have to keep adjusting it. I could keep working with both my hands. It was perfect. The bottles of water also proved useful because by the time I was finished changing the tire and throwing the spare or the flat tire in the back and taking the jack apart and all of that, I'd worked up a pretty good thirst. One thing I wish I'd included was a pair of work gloves. I didn't think about this originally because I was thinking about needing this bag for a get-home bag. So you could, get home. Well, I didn't consider how the bag's contents would be useful for a situation like I was in that parking garage, stopped and making repairs. Working that jack and wrenching on the tire iron with my bare hands left me pretty sore, and with a couple of scraped knuckles and a pair of work gloves sure would have been nice. So I'm definitely adding that. And in my article originally, I did add one thing. And here's what I said. One last item to consider is a firearm and a small quantity of self-defense ammunition. Obviously, that would put you over the $50 mark, so I'm not going to make a recommendation here. I'll leave it to your judgment. Your decision to include a firearm will be based on several factors like who will be driving, how to keep it secure, state laws, etc. And this is what I would definitely recommend looking back on it now, outside the constraint of that build it for $50 original idea. Adding some kind of inexpensive firearm and a box of self-defense ammo would be a great idea. And here's why. I booked my flight to North Carolina on very short notice. It was a very quick turnaround. Because it was booked on at the last minute, it didn't have a lot of good choices for flights. I had a short layover in Atlanta. If you've ever flown through Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta, you know that if you have short layovers between flights, it's easy to miss those flights, and you'll be running like crazy to get from one gate to another, because generally you're arriving in one terminal and departing from another. And I don't know how many times I've flown through that airport and had my bags delayed because they didn't make the flight and I did. Well, I really didn't want to risk having my bag delayed. It was a quick turnaround flight. I was going to fly out on Friday, fly back on Sunday. I didn't want to check a bag and risk having my dress clothes for the funeral and my EDC gun delayed by the airport. There's no way it would have made my connecting flight, because the turnaround between flights, the layover between flights was like 33 minutes. And I would have ended up having to buy clothes to wear for the funeral. Plus, the time that the luggage would have taken to be delivered to me, I would have been on my way back to Texas by the time the airport or the airline got the bag delivered, because where I was flying to, where the funeral was 2 hours from the airport. So there's no way that I would have gotten my bags. I probably would have been back in Texas before the bags got delivered to my mom's house. So all that being said, I decided not to check a bag, and I left my EDC gun at home. Now, in hindsight, what I should have done was to take the gun with me and lock it in the car, but I didn't. And when I was in that dark garage changing the tire, I was totally unarmed, and I recognized it. When I heard people walking through, when I heard cars coming, it was very dimly lit. It was hard to see. I was between cars. I didn't have a gun, and I had no way of defending myself beyond my hands and a tire iron. So adding a cheap surplus gun and some ammo to my get-home bag would make perfect sense, and that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I would recommend. Here's some other ideas that I thought of based on personal experience from the past that didn't make it into the original get-home bag, that are really sort of specific to my family situation in some cases, but might spark some thoughts on your part. I think adding some kind of sugary candy would be a good idea, something like Lifesavers or maybe peanut butter sticks for use in combating hypoglycemic attacks. My wife has low blood sugar, and when her blood sugar drops, it's bad news. Dizziness, disorientation, headaches, nausea. Having something sugary in the get-home bag in case of an emergency, even if it's not a situation where you have to leave the vehicle, but just having it in the car is a good idea if you have family members with similar issues. Along those same lines, if any of your family members has prescription medications that they regularly take, keeping a couple of doses in that get-home bag would be a good idea in case you get stranded. And let's say you're traveling, the car breaks down, and that burrito you had for lunch or some stomach bug decides to hit you or a member of your family after you abandon the car or as you're waiting for help. So adding an anti-diarrheal medicine to your first aid kit, either tablets or liquid, would be a good idea too. Do any of your family members have allergies? Mine do. Particularly if they're severe, keeping Benadryl or something like that in your first aid kit would also be a good idea. So, like I said in the first story, in the original story that I wrote, the bag I came up with was intended as a start. So keep adding to your bag as you think of items that might be important or useful. But don't go crazy. Remember, if you have to abandon the car, you're going to have to carry the bag, and you want to keep it as light and portable as possible. So what do you think? If you've got any ideas, be sure to email me. Let me know what you think of my ideas, and share your experiences, or call and leave a voicemail with your suggestions. We'd love to hear what you think and share your ideas on a future episode. Do you carry a gun for personal protection? I do. What kind of a holster do you use? When I started out, I had no idea what I was doing. You've got to get a good holster. First and foremost, you got the gun, you got to get something good to carry it in. Well, I had no idea what that meant until I found Kooks Holsters at kooksholsters.com. Try the inside the waistband holster with an adjustable clip. I've carried that one for years. They've also got another one, the Comfort Series holster that can be worn inside or outside the waistband. I've got both of them for several of my guns. They're the most comfortable holsters I've ever owned. Available in lots of colors, including custom printed Kydex. Kooks holsters are made in the USA in the great state of Georgia. They come with a 100% lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit Kooks Holsters at www.kooksholsters.com. Be sure to use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and you'll get a 15% discount on everything in the store. You put a lot of money into the gun you choose to carry, right? Every day you put that gun on, make sure you're putting it into the best holster available, kooksholsters.com. Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for a little listener email. This one comes from Tim, who is an American artist living in the land of Luther. Tim writes, "Hello, good folks. I'm an American artist living in Germany, originally from Pennsylvania, near where Obama made the phrase clinging to guns and religion infamous. First of all, love your show." Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. Here is my query or comment. Although many before them scrutinized Latin versions of the Bible, Martin Luther and William Tyndale were the two most accredited for the Reform. When examining their actions and consequences of them, my personal interpretation is that they built an incredible foundation to rest free will upon. In short, they did not think it correct that the Pope dictates Christian doctrine. This brings me to your current show headline, Episode 6, You Can't Be Pro-Life and Pro-Gun. I am confused. Is it not up to each individual to take responsibility for their own decision? What gives me the right to say that a person is not allowed to be pro-choice? Although I think it is wrong to abort, I am pro-choice in regards to an individual's right to free will. God will determine what is in their heart. I hope you understand my meaning. At the same time, I am pro-gun for the same reason. What gives another person the right to limit my free will? Maybe I think too much. Thanks again for the great show you folks produce. Cheers and God bless. Tim. All right, Tim, thanks very much for contacting me. I appreciate that. It's a really good question. The title of the latest episode, last week's episode, is drawn from an article by the Reverend Rob Schenck, and it was in the Washington Post originally. I've got a segment in last week's show called Clinging to God and Guns, where Lutheran Pastor John Bennett and we look at articles by people like Reverend Schenck, who claim Scripture as the basis for their belief in gun control. Now, Schenck's article suggests that if you're pro-life, you've got to be pro-gun, or you've got to be pro-gun control. And as you'll hear in that segment, Pastor Bennett and I will nuke that assertion pretty thoroughly. Well, let me respond to several of your points. In case you haven't heard that segment, I'd encourage you to go back and listen. Always listen to my show. But first off, with regards to free will, let's talk about that first. Martin Luther was not a huge fan of free will. Certainly not like other reformers like Calvin or Zwingli. In his treatise on the bondage of the will, which he published in 1525, Luther explained that sin prevents us from choosing salvation. So our free will, we're incapable of choosing God. We're captive to the will of Satan, who Luther pointed out, is the ruler of the mortal world. Satan won't let you choose good unless our will is overpowered by the will of God. So we can't, by our own reason or our own strength, choose to be saved. We cannot choose to be good, or we can't choose between good and evil because we're sinful from birth. Salvation is the work of God and the Holy Spirit changing our hearts. Luther departed from other reformers who placed a lot of emphasis on free will and the need for an individual willful act to obtain salvation. Now, some require some kind of conversion experience, some spiritual experience like an altar call or choosing to be born again. But that willful act is to do good deeds in order to merit salvation. We're not saved by our own works. We're saved by grace through faith alone, not by any merit on our part. We're free to sin, but apart from the Holy Spirit, we can't be saved. We cannot be saved of our own free will. If we could, there would have been no need for Christ to go to the cross and die for our sins. If we could merit our own salvation by our own works, by our own choices, then the Old Testament, the old Mosaic law is really all we need. So, yeah, you can choose to be pro-choice because the sinful world will tell you that it's the tolerant thing to do. It's the tolerant thing to believe. It's the reasonable thing to believe that it's a woman's body. It's her choice. That's not God's will talking. That's Satan. You can choose to be a murderer as well. Sin can easily be chosen. We're sinners from birth. So, now to your question about what gives us the right to say that someone can't be pro-choice. Now, we're not talking about, the right to believe whatever you want to believe. You have a right to believe whatever you want. We're not talking about any kind of, we're not talking about thought police or that kind of thing. What we're talking about is this false dichotomy that the question that Reverend Schenck proposes has created. This false distinction, the suggestion that Reverend Schenck in his article proposes that we dissect last week is this: you oppose abortion because it's the taking of a human life. Therefore, since guns are used to take human life, you can't be pro-gun. That's a false dichotomy. Using that approach, as Pastor Bennett points out in our segment last week, we should start banning all kinds of stuff that could be used to take a human life. But the fact is that guns are used every day by millions of Americans for purposes that don't result in the ending of a human life. Many cases of defensive gun use don't even result in shots fired. But beyond self-defense and home defense, there's target shooting, there's hunting, competitive shooting, varmint control, all kinds of stuff. Guns can be used for evil purposes as well, as we know. But the vast majority of guns in this country are used for lawful purposes that don't result in the death of a human being. Abortion, on the other hand, is the unjust ending of a human life. Every woman who has an abortion kills a child. It's undeniably a violation of the fifth commandment, for no other reason than for the convenience of the parents, so they don't have to take responsibility for their actions. The Bible calls on us to love our neighbors, even those who hate us, even those who sin, especially those who sin. Now, I've never been a fan of the idea that you yell at people who don't agree with you. You don't calling them sinners, or telling them they're going to hell. That's not for us to decide. That's for God to decide. And it hardens hearts against God's word. But I do not believe that as Christians, we are to abandon the cultural battlefields and leave the world to its fate and refuse to speak out against what's wrong. If we refuse to speak out about what's right and what's wrong, we just leave the world to die. Someone can say that they're pro-choice, sure, and we should be civil to them. But we should also share with them the good news of Christ's saving grace, with love and with kindness. Sinners need to hear that. They need to see that Christ loves them and that we as Christ's redeemed love them too, even if we disapprove of their choices. That doesn't mean we shy away from pointing out sin or speaking the truth. That doesn't mean that we shy away from speaking our minds about the truth and the evil of abortion. Tim, I hope that helps clarify things. Thank you for your letter. I appreciate it. If any of you would like to send a message, have us respond to it on the air, feel free to send us an email, armedlutheranradio@gmail.com, or you can leave a voicemail. We'll play that on the air as long as it's civil at 855-54-ARMED. You know, liberals in the media hate guns. We all know this. Their abject fear of them, despite knowing next to nothing about them, is pretty legendary. But I ran across a couple of articles this week which I think take hoplophobia to a whole new level. Writing at Today Parents, Rebecca Lowen worries about a new toy gun from Hasbro, which was announced at the New York Toy Fair last weekend. The Nerf Rival Chaos features a 40-round magazine. Lowen calls it a clip, and it fires Nerf darts at 68 miles an hour, full auto. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye or a torso, Lowen says in leading off her story. Now, I guess if you're a delicate flower like Lowen, getting hit with a Nerf dart might take out your entire torso, I don't know. But proving how willfully ignorant liberal anti-gunners are, listen to this. In her second sentence of the article, Lowen describes how the new Nerf gun will fire foam pellets at 68 miles per hour. Then in the very next sentence, she says, spongy balls will keep coming as long as the shooter keeps a finger on the trigger. So which is it? Foam pellets or spongy balls? Well, it looks like it's neither. 3 sentences after that, she calls them bullets, and then shows a tweet from Nerf Nation displaying the gun and its ammo, referred to in the picture as darts. So I'm guessing from the tone of her disbelief, her little darlings are not permitted to play with guns at home. It wouldn't surprise me. She's probably the kind of mom who chides her kids for playing cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, or for making guns with their fingers and making the pew-pew sounds. Hasbro promised the that was a Freudian slip. Hasbro promised the hefty blaster's bullets don't hurt and won't leave a mark. Anyone care to take one for the team to test that claim on behalf of children everywhere? Now, look at this post from the next day by John Levine at Mike.com. It's entitled, This Nerf Automatic Rifle is the Ultimate Second Amendment Loophole. Now, I have no idea what that sentence even means. Automatic weapons, now fun for the whole family, says Levine in starting off his story. No, actually, John, automatic weapons are fun, so thank you very much. And yes, fun for the entire family. But our pansified journalist then worries, while the Nerf ammo reportedly doesn't leave any permanent damage, the move is curious, as the United States remains embroiled in a contentious debate about gun violence and gun control, and automatic and semi-automatic weapons are at the center of the debate. No, automatic weapons are not at the center of the debate. They're only at the center of the debate because idiots like you, John Levine, seem to think that semi-automatic and automatic are the same thing. That's probably because our president keeps using the word automatic as a way to confuse people. Automatic weapons are almost never used. In fact, I can't think of a time, unless you go back to the North Hollywood shooting in, 1997. They're not owned by everyday citizens, unless you have a Class 3 federal firearms license, but John Levine doesn't know this because he's ignorant. So, John decided he would scrounge up some outrage on Twitter, and typically that's not hard to do. But Levine only found one gay Canadian and a comedy site that pokes fun at stuff, but based on the tweet that he used, I can't tell if they're actually outraged. Most tweets are from professionals and college kids who envision a change in the balance of power in their office and dorm wars. And still, Levine did find something to get his panties in a wad about. And while surely innocuous, one tweet gives reason for momentary pause, he said. Writes White Rabbit 216, I found a fully automatic Nerf gun online that holds 40 rounds and fires them up to 68 miles per hour that I want for work in the office. Really? That gave you momentary pause? In any event, even the most stringent proposed gun control bills do not call for the control of Nerf guns, so the new blaster will probably be coming to a toy store near you. So, Levine actually thinks gun control should prevent automatic toy guns? Seriously? Levine is just the kind of lib who worries obsessively about all things guns. People who suffer from this kind of delusional worry are actually the people we should be concerned about. Not people like at White Rabbit 216 who wants a Nerf gun toy to play with at work.
Remember, Armed Lutheran Radio comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you are not completely satisfied, the next episode is free.
A huge part of my father's life's work has been to record and preserve my family's history. He's been investigating and writing about the history of the Bailey family going back to Jamestown. He was our version of Ancestry.com before the invention of the internet. He's published a dozen volumes of family histories. You can find them at TowRiverValleyHeritage.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now, the website is a little out of date. I probably need to get with him to help him update that. But one of his lighter publications that you'll find on the website is called Ticklers from the Toe. It's a collection of humorous stories from the Avery, Mitchell, and Yancey County areas of western North Carolina. Stories that my father has heard or recorded in interviews or which have been published in other places. What brings me to mention this today is the current debate that we hear and we read about regarding guns in church. Open carry, concealed carry. Should we be doing it? Is it the thing to do? Is it the Christian thing to do? Well, we hear these discussions as though they're modern issues, as though it's something that modern pro-gun movement people have just started pushing. When in fact, it was just a couple of generations ago, before the Brady Bill, before the 1968 Gun Control Act, before background checks, before the proliferation of concealed carry laws, back when you could order a gun by mail and have it delivered to your door, the issue of carrying a gun in church was not really an issue. I was reading through Ticklers from the Toe over the weekend, and story number 252 jumped out at me. It was called Always Be Prepared for the Worst. It's a story told by Burnsville, North Carolina native Bob Wilson and transcribed from recordings that my father made. Bob tells a story about his mother, whom he refers to as a real mountain woman, who usually kept a pistol close at hand. Bob writes, she was at a prayer meeting at the Pensacola Methodist Church when the preacher said that he had a special prayer for somebody, and he invited everybody who was present to come forward to hear it. Up to the mourner's bench, I guess. A woman and my mother got up about halfway down the aisle, my mother said, "Wait a minute, I forgot my purse on the seat." The woman grabbed her arm and said, "Joanne, you don't need your purse down there." And Mother said, "Sure I do. My gun's in it." I'd be willing to bet the story of Bob's mom carrying a pistol at church was not all that uncommon back then. So what's changed? Why does it freak us out now? Got any thoughts on that? Got any stories about that? Email them, armedlutheranradio@gmail.com, or give us a call, 855-54-ARMED, and share your stories. We'd love to hear them. Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Today, Bill comes to us again from his mobile studio with a few tips on how to improve your accuracy.
Those that know me probably are going to laugh at me talking about accuracy, because this is something that I constantly work on. Accuracy is the kind of thing where when you're shooting practical sports, competition shooting, defensive shooting, when you're trying to go really fast, sometimes your accuracy goes out the window. But you always strive and work to have better accuracy. Now let's start with type of sights. There are many different types of sights. There's a small notch with a big front. There's a big notch with a little front. There's fiber optics. There's 3 dots. There's all different kinds of sights. Don't listen to what other people tell you. Try all the different types of sights, even if it's just borrowing a friend's gun. See what they're like. See how they work for you. The reason why there are so many different types of sights on handguns is because each person is different. The way you see something may be different than the way someone else sees it. So try them out. Find out what works for you. And certain types of sights work better for different types of shooting, whether it be bullseye shooting, IDPA, USPSA, skeet shooting, defensive shooting. There's different types of sights for each different type of shooting and for each shooter. Now, when it comes to accuracy, what we're all talking about is acceptable accuracy. What that means is getting a good, accurate shot in any kind of practical shooting sports or defensive shooting. You want to do it with speed. There's a fine line between speed and accuracy. If you shoot too fast, you can have very bad accuracy. If you have really good accuracy, sometimes you're shooting really slow. So you got to find that fine line. You got to see what you can and can't do. And a lot of times that just takes experimentation. You need to experiment with different distances to targets so you can see how fast you can or can't shoot them. Try them out. Push yourself. See what you can do. The target will show you what you can and can't do very quickly. Now, I look at it as 3 different types of sight pictures. You can have index or point shooting, a loose floating sight picture, or a hard front sight focus. A point shooting is, something you do between 0 and 5 yards. The gun is out in front of you. It's indexed at the target. You're pointing it at the target. You're target focused with your vision. You see the gun there. You break the shot. And you can determine your level of accuracy on how fast you can shoot that way. Then there's the loose or floating sight picture. That's roughly anywhere from 5 to 15 yards. That's where you're seeing the sights. You don't have a really hard front sight focus. You might be on the front sight focus. You might be on target focus or somewhere in between. But you see the sights. You're using them to aim at your target to get that acceptable accuracy. And then finally, for difficult shots, there's a hard front sight focus. Now, that difficult shot could be as close as 10 yards, just depending on how difficult the shot is. There's lots of ways to make difficult shots, whether it's just using distance, shooting at steel, target size, if the target's partially covered. All of these things play into it. Now, that hard front sight focus is where you're going to take your time, prep the trigger, get your sights lined up on your target, and you're really working on that, focusing on the front sight so you can get the maximum accuracy that you can get. Now, especially when using this hard front sight focus, you need to use the sights correctly. Most people get confused sometimes when they first start shooting handguns. They're just put that front post in the notch and they figure that's good enough. Sometimes because they have 3-dot sights, they line up the dots. Sometimes the front dot is above the rear dots or vice versa. What you really need to use, and this kind of goes across the board for any rear notch and front post sights, you need to use the top of the sights of the rear notch and the front post. Use the very top, make it like a line those up so that they're perfectly even. That will give you maximum accuracy. That's how the sights are intended to be used. But on the opposite of that, when you're using an index or a floating sight picture, which in most competition shooting, defensive type shooting, that's the type of sight picture you're going to use. You don't have to be perfect. Go to the range. Try using misaligned sights. Put that front post a little high. Put it a little low in that rear notch. Put it as far to the left as you can see it in the rear notch, or as far to the right as you can see it. And shoot at targets, whether it be 3 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards. See what you can do with those sights out of alignment and still get acceptable accuracy and acceptable hits. You'll probably be pleasantly surprised at how well you shoot with the sights out of alignment, out of perfect alignment. The last thing I see that affects accuracy for most shooters, myself included, is your grip. If you have a bad grip, it can influence the gun for bad shots. If your support hand is steering the gun, pushing it one direction or the other, if you do not have a strong grip. Now, hand strength plays into this. The more hand strength you have, the better your grip, the better trigger control you'll have. Better trigger control is what really gives you the best accuracy. You can have fantastic trigger control and very imprecise sight picture and still get outstanding accuracy. But if you have horrible trigger control and you're using a great sight picture, if you're yanking the gun left and right or down or whatever it may be because your trigger control is not up to par, then your accuracy is going to suffer. This has been a Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
And that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @ArmedLutheran and like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/TheArmedLutheran. You can contact us by email at armedlutheranradio@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 855-54-ARMED. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.